Dear brothers and sisters on the move, greetings to you all. This is just a note to remind us of the fact that W.E.B. Du Bois constantly agitated on behalf of the imprisoned population. Acclaimed scholar activist Angela Davis has echoed these efforts, and in her scholarship has worked to uncover the tentacles of the prison industrial complex. The latest to examine this question has been law professor Michelle Alexander, who in her new book, The New Jim Crow, has uncovered the horrors and devastation of the incarceral state, finding, among other things, that present-day America has outranked even apartheid South Africa in the numbers of imprisoned black folks, men and women. If we are to examine the black community's survival, we must address the prison industrial complex and its impacts on the community. I thank you for listening. On the move. From death row, this is Mumia Abu Jamal.
Racism, white supremacy, can inflict some of its most intense damage when you do not have white people making explicit racist comments. When you don't have white people who are saying nigger this or misdemeanor murders, gorillas in the mist, you don't have any white person with a smoking gun, that's a racist, but you end up with things like what you talk about in your book, the Rockefeller laws, where no one has called anyone a nigger, but you end up with hordes of black people jammed into prisons where you said this looks like another example of how racism, white supremacy works to abuse non-white people. And I think that is still rampant across the country. You even talked about how in Texas they have a higher rate of locking up black people in Texas than anywhere else in the country by far. Another example of where you don't necessarily have any white people standing and jumping up and down talking about we've got 1113, a nigger, don't even worry about it. But you do end up with a severe racist effect where large numbers of black people are being harmed by what seems to be the system of racism, white supremacy in action again. Would you agree?
I would agree enthusiastically. I couldn't agree more. I think what's happened now is that you don't get the blatant and obvious stuff as much. Mm-hmm. What you get is much more insidious. And in that sense, because you can't see it, taste it, smell it for what it really is, it gets excused, it gets explained away. Well, the reason more non-whites are in prison is because they're committing more crimes. Well, let's take a look at those, quote, crimes that they're committing. More often than not, they are non-violent drug offenses. More often than not, they are victims of the war on drugs in wildly disproportionate numbers. In fact, Gus, this is something a number of people don't really understand about the war on drugs. When Richard Nixon was preparing to trot out his new policy, proclaiming drugs public enemy number one and declaring all-out war on them, he was really declaring war on his own people. To my way of thinking, what he did on that occasion was especially if one looks back at all the damage that has been done, was an impeachable offense. And in fact, he and Bob Haldeman and John Ehrlichman, his two top aides, were in the Oval Office talking about the following. Well, we really can't say we're targeting young black men, so we're going to have to, quote, target their recreation, and made a fundamental assumption about drug use. White drug use, by the way, is comparable, if not greater, than non-white drug use in our society, and yet to the order of 6 times to 12 times the number of young black men, for example, are going to prison behind nonviolent drug offenses. And those Rockefeller laws, of course, have been draconian now for decades. But Nixon, Haldeman, and Ehrlichman specifically targeted young people, poor people, and people of color as the victims of the war on drugs. We spent $1 trillion prosecuting that war, incarcerated tens of millions of people, wildly disproportionate numbers of them young and poor and of color. And what do we have to show for it, by the way? I mean, I know that's a whole other topic, but the drug war has done far more damage than good, and it's time to end it, and to empty those cells of particularly young black men who have been separated from their families and sent to prison for a long time, and have found their lives, damaged if not destroyed. They're not likely to find employment very easily or satisfying employment. They're not likely to, be able to, if you get busted for a nonviolent drug offense, you can lose your school loans, you can lose your public housing. It's just a horrible, horrible thing that we've done. And yet, you pointed out Texas. During the 1990s, Texas built one university and 77 prisons. And people point to that with pride. It's a matter of shame and an embarrassment to our country.
Wow.